Tonight, the topic of my lecture is making the dream, making his dream our own. And before I start, I want to just say that I chose this because as long as we hold something to belong to someone else, we're not invested in it. And often the way I tell when I'm as president of a college and I'm talking with people, and whenever they talk about my college, helping me with my college, and they don't use the term our college, I know they're not totally invested. And as long as we see Martin Luther King's dream as his dream, then we are not totally invested. And so tonight I want to talk to you about making his dream our dream. We're here to commemorate the birthday of a man whose life and work made an immeasurable impact on 20th century American society, an impact that lasted until now. A man cut down in the prime of his life and in the middle of a struggle for racial and economic justice for a community of people who had suffered long and grave inequity. Yet, until now, many people are too young to remember not just the man, but the issues that were the focus of his life. And for most of many of our lives, these issues may have seemed little more than a remote reality. Since this is a different America because of the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others like himself, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ralph Abernathy, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, and Angela Davis, many have no clue what we are really commemorating today. For many, whether black or white, poor or well-set, the commemoration of Dr. King's birth has become simply another 3-day holiday. When there are no classes, business can choose whether or not to close, big stores have gigantic sales, and many get to sleep in late. For a long time, many of you, no matter what your ethnicity or culture, have been too young to really be concerned about the circumstances that shaped the generation which made Dr. King prominent. And these circumstances, as ugly as they might have been for those who lived through them, seemingly have little import for many of us. I understand that distance because my life has been different from that of my parents and grandparents. Though I had a taste of the reality that encompassed much of it, my life, their life in segregated schools, segregated bathrooms, segregated neighborhoods, lynching, legal job discrimination, legal disparity in healthcare delivery, all seemed far away from my own social context. I did not live through the harshest period of Jim Crow, and I could watch from the comfortable distance of our black and white TV screen as other people, some of them young people like me, endured water hoses, billy clubs, dogs, arrests, and even worse. And to many, especially within my current comfortable context, such scenes have been an even more remote part of someone else's reality, so seemingly unimportant in the scheme of everyday things until now. I can hear the remarks from well-meaning people of both cultures that have convinced themselves and try to convince the rest of the world that all that racial stuff is over. All the inequities have been overcome. Or who make the complaint that we do not need another meaningless holiday to add to the list of meaningless holidays we can't remember why we're celebrating. Or who simply ask the question, who was Dr. King anyway? Dr. King was not a perfect man by any means, because he, like all of us, was human. He, like most who claimed allegiance to Christian faith, was both saint and sinner. Though those who would detract from his important work constantly magnify the sinner and minimize any virtuous attributes, I am not here to give a saintly coronation or hagiography to Dr. King. Even though this federal holiday is celebrated by all of America, Dr. King served time in jail and was under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Though he was an ordained Baptist minister, a husband, and a father, he was accused by some of being a womanizer in this period of hypersexuality. His name may have been one of those who were ousted on the Me Too list. Yet, without dismissing or excusing his very human failings, the question is, what is the essence of the man? What is it that he lived and died for? What are we commemorating? Despite his shortcomings, Dr. King was a spiritual leader, and I would dare say one who was called into the kingdom for such a time as America was experiencing in the late 20th century. As a spiritual leader, he understood some things intrinsically. He understood that the power of nonviolent confrontation. He understood that it takes very little strength to hate and even less strength to disregard, but it takes great strength to love. Dr. King was a visionary who understood that real change was possible, but could not be had easily or for free. He understood that it cost something to bring about authentic transformation, for in his 1963 book, Strength to Love, he said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." It is ironic that the violence surrounding his death appeared to accomplish what years of nonviolent protests and activism could not. Some might even say that at first glance, their side, the violent side, won. For his death unleashed a torrent of rioting and carnage, the level of which had rarely, if ever, been witnessed in this country, as countless neighborhoods in the inner cities of this country were destroyed by fire, many lives were lost, and the economic infrastructure of many inner city communities suffered a crashing blow. But you can easily conclude that his death and his life were pointless and that their side won, if you dismiss the value of what Dr. King called redemptive suffering. As a prophet, unlike the prosperity preachers of our day, who tells his congregation that life should be pain-free, Dr. King understood that not all suffering should be avoided. He understood that suffering for the sake of justice could be redemptive. He further understood that some suffering, even when it leads to death, is to be embraced for the end that it brings about. He understood intuitively and practically the ageless truth, as he said in 1963, if a man or woman hasn't discovered something for which he will die, he isn't fit to live. But what good is a prophet without a just cause? He called a nation back to the essential truth of God, that all men and women are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, not just civil rights granted by the state to be withheld or withdrawn at will based on some artificial standard of worthiness, but human rights granted by our Creator to flourish and be fully human based on our God-imaged createdness. He was a husband and a father, and his work took as much a toll on his family as it did on him. He spent countless hours away from his children. Their lives were repeatedly threatened. Their house was set on fire. He was taken from them and jailed, and ultimately they lost their father and husband to violence. He was a pastor of a little Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama, that became a strategic center for civil rights activism. He was an orator and a preacher. His cadence was addictive. His deep, rich baritone voice lingered and still lingers in our ears. But what good is a preacher without a word? Dr. King had a relevant word for the time, a word of comfort and hope to those who had given up on the possibility of ever being truly free. A word that at the same time worried those who had become comfortable with the status quo of their injustice. And he spoke it with passion that was contagious. He rallied a nation to action. He was a theologian, not in the academic sense, though he trained theologically at some of the best schools in the nation. He was a rubber hit the road theologian who, like Paul, sometimes found himself writing his theology from a jail cell. He was a theologian of the heart as well as the head. He was a social activist, fighting not just for the community viability of African Americans, but the communal soul of a nation. And for a more just world that would not be the chessboard for the working out of the ego issues of leaders of a small cadre of superpowers. Yet he was also a statesman. This man sat with dignitaries, talked with mayors, governors, presidents, and kings, received numerous accolades, including the Nobel Peace Prize. But he also marched in the streets with thousands of nameless common people in city after city to come alongside them in their struggle for human justice. His last speech on the evening of his death was to a gathering of sanitary workers who had assembled at a Pentecostal church to bolster their protests against the city of Memphis, Tennessee, for what they considered unfair labor practices. But he was not alone. Countless other brave men and women, many of whom have gained recognition in their own right, but also many whose names we did not know and will never know, marched and sacrificed with him. So it is not merely the man that we commemorate today, but the essence of what he stood for, the essence of a dream. We're here to commemorate and celebrate courage. We're here to celebrate inner strength and determination. We're here to celebrate vision, and we're here to celebrate the essence of a dream that in many ways is still deferred. Perhaps the most famous, or at least the most quoted speech King delivered is referred to as the Dream Speech, and when he laid out a vision of a just America. His dream, he said, was not simply rooted in the American dream. King's dream was not for a better life for African Americans. His dream was for a better, more just America for all citizens. His dream was for a better world for all humanity. He wanted no more for himself, his family, and his people than every American wants for themselves. No more than every human being who ever glimpsed freedom or labored under oppression or depravity wants for themselves. He dreamed that all Americans would be treated equally in every arena, so that the nation could live out the meaning of its purpose, purported pledge to hold self-evidently true that all men and women are created equal. He dreamed that sons and daughters of former slaves and former slave owners would be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. He dreamed that all forms of oppression would end and that freedom and justice would be available even in the areas of our nation historically more entrenched in racial bigotry. He dreamed that this nation would one day judge his children and my children purely on the content of their character without regard to their race, the color of their skin, or any social qualifier. So during this time of commemoration, we pause to take stock and ask ourselves how much of the dream has been deferred and how much has become a reality. For certainly, as the commercial ditty says, we've come a long way, baby, to get where we got to today. Perhaps further than many who are here would ever have expected. African Americans, other people of color, and women serve at all levels of corporate structures, including as CEOs and board members. We have high salary professionals in every arena of the entertainment, media, and sports world, and their products regularly top the charts. There are people of color in leadership at every level of state and federal government. Our schools and neighborhoods are no longer officially segregated. Our aspiring college students are no longer relegated only to historically Black colleges and universities. And we elected the first president who is a person of color. But we still have a long way to go. African Americans still sit at the bottom of the economic ladder. High school dropout rates for African Americans are higher than almost every other group, as is the rate of incarceration, while college entrance rates are the lowest. Racial profiling places our young men in perpetual danger from law enforcement. We have a higher mortality rate from preventable diseases than any other group. HIV/AIDS is higher among our population. Illicit drugs continue to ravage our communities. A narcissistic gospel of prosperity has created an individualistic culture that is antithetical to our communal African spirituality, and the military-industrial complex and rabid nationalism continue to endanger the health and flourishing of the entire human community. 5 years ago, I imagined stepping into the future to write a letter to a friend on Dr. King's 218th birthday. During the 50th anniversary year of his death, in that letter, I envisioned a world that had lived up to his dream. I would like to share that letter with you. January 18th, 2018. Dearest, today is Dr. King's birthday. This is the 39th year that we as a nation are celebrating this holiday. Those of us who have been working to keep the dream alive have a lot to celebrate over the few years. Just like King dreamed, America has become a place of justice and peace for all those who call this land their home, whether they were born here or came as immigrants. The race question is settled. It has become a dead issue. No one is being discriminated in any arena. There's been a massive reduction in the number of children in poverty in America because there has been a significant decline in the number of babies born to unprepared teenage mothers and a significant rise in the number of fathers actively sharing in the raising of their children. In the last 12 months, there have been no drive-by shootings in the inner cities. There have been no drug overdoses. Not one hate crime has been reported. Neither has there been any case of child abuse or police brutality. The rate of homelessness has greatly decreased so that we have closed several hundred shelters throughout the country. The number of people on welfare rolls has dwindled to a precious few. Viable jobs with meaningful wages are available for every willing, able person, and those who legitimately can't work are supported by a fair subsidy and nurtured by the cooperative effort of their families, communities, and communities of faith. The medical research community has found a cure for HIV/AIDS, and more importantly, the proportion of people contracting the disease each year has declined significantly in this country and throughout the world. Further, the pharmaceutical companies have formed a cooperative to ensure that no one needing medication goes without it. The medical community has joined forces with insurance firms to ensure that no one, whether they were born with a pre-existing condition, succumbed to a catastrophic illness, or have fallen on hard financial times, is denied adequate health care, and everyone receives the same high level of care. We have elected an African-American president and a woman vice president. The new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is Latino. The Speaker of the House is Native American, and the Senate Majority Leader is Asian American. And the greatest news of all, the World Court and the United Nations announced today that they were outlawing war. And there has been a massive turn-in of weapons of destruction by the major powers. Sincerely, Estrelda. You may call me a starry-eyed liberal, a radical agitator, or a totally naive dreamer. I've been called worse things. Or you may say, if some have labeled me, a visionary. But it really doesn't matter. Too much is at stake to quibble over labels. But I have a vision, if you will, a dream deferred, as James Weldon Johnson characterized in his poem. Indeed, I have adopted Dr. King's dream that one day Justice will roll down like water in the midst of a dry and thirsty land. That my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and yet unborn great-great-grandchildren will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin or the texture of their hair or the gait of their walk or any other superficial indicator of their inherent worth. The stronghold of a culture of greed that controls access to every person's basic need for adequate housing, safe neighborhoods, quality education at every level, quality food choices, healthcare delivery would be broken, and all of our citizens would live the abundant life that is part of our Christian heritage. Though we've come here to commemorate Dr. King and seek to make his dream a reality, I lift the words of another dreamer of that era, then candidate Robert Kennedy. As I said this morning, some people see things as they are, and that's why. I see things as they could be, and that's why not. Those who refuse to sit and decry a lack of leadership or to wait for another Dr. King to arise, but who dare to ask, to shout, why not, are the only hope for keeping his dream alive and making it our reality. There are the ones who dare roll up their sleeves and do the little they can, or form countless coalitions whose multiplied power becomes a force with which to be reckoned. Proverbially, the race to that reality is not a sprint. Rather, it is a marathon. Each generation must pass the baton and the mantle to the next. And each generation must make its contribution, its progress towards the goal. Each one, regardless of our generational identity, must play its role, for it takes a generational village to fight injustice. And here I differ from the Apostle Paul. We cannot forget those things, those issues, struggles, sacrifices, and even martyrdoms that are behind us. We draw strength remembering the struggle of those like King who carried these struggles on. They are part of the great crowd of witnesses that spurs us on. Yet we must press even harder now towards the mark that his dream has set before us. The dream of justice cannot remain an illusion. We must envision it as an attainable why not. As King said, it must be something for which we are willing to die. To our personal ambitions, to our own agendas, to our narrowly focused visions of the future that only cares about our community at the expense of the rest of humanity. Certainly, left to themselves, things will not get better on their own. Injustice will not just go away. The dream will only become further deferred. But rather than dry up like a raisin in the sun, it will certainly fester like a sore and run as continued hostility and fragmentation of our nation, as continued violence in the streets of our cities, and further disintegration of our society. Like King, justice cannot simply be something we hope will happen. It must be something we develop a passion for and work to bring about. The same passion that led their detractors to accuse the New Testament Christians of turning the world upside down. The same further that led the Azusa Street saints to burst out from Los Angeles and take the message of the fire of a new Pentecost around the globe. His dream must become imperative to us, as necessary as life itself. We must own the dream of justice as our own and do everything within our power to bring it to pass. Nothing short of this is a fitting celebration.